The killings were indeed atrocious and cruel.
There are individuals who have earned themselves the title of ruthless killers. These notorious figures have instilled fear in people. But what happens when the merciless murderers are finally faced with the prospect of their own demise? Without any further delay, let's get started. Number 6. Gary Ridgway. Gary Ridgway was a truck painter who confessed to killing 49 women in the Seattle area between 1986 and 1998. He was sentenced to death in 2003 and is currently on death row at the Washington State Penitentiary. Ridgway's reaction to the death sentence was mixed. He initially expressed relief and he later expressed regret, saying that he wanted to live so that he could help other people. Also, we can see him breaking down over father's forgiveness. Number 5. Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer was a serial killer who murdered 17 men and boys between 1978 and 1991. He would often lure his victims to his apartment, drug them, and then strangle or bludgeon them to death. He would then dismember the bodies and dispose of them in various ways, including cannibalism and necrophilia. Dahmer was eventually caught and convicted of his crimes. He was sentenced to 15 life sentences and one additional sentence of 15 years to life. He told the court that he had never wanted freedom and that he actually wanted death for himself. He said that he knew he was sick or evil and that he was sorry for the harm he had caused. However, he was never able to serve his full sentence. In 1994, he was beaten to death by a fellow inmate at the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portridge, Wisconsin. Number 4. Charles Manson. Charles Manson was a cult leader who ordered the murders of 9 people in 1969, including actress Sharon Tate. Manson was a charismatic and manipulative figure who used his influence to convince his followers to commit violence. He believed that a race war was coming, and he wanted his followers to be prepared. The murders that Manson ordered were part of his plan to start the race war. He was convicted of murder and sentenced to death, but his sentence was later commuted to life in prison. Manson died in prison in 2017 at the age of 83. Manson's reaction to his death sentence was one of defiance. He refused to show any remorse for his crimes and he even claimed that he was innocent. Number 3. John Wayne Gacy. John Wayne Gacy was a serial killer who murdered at least 33 young men and boys in the Chicago area between 1972 and 1978. He buried most of his victims in a crawl space of his home. He was known as the Killer Clown because he often dressed up as a clown for charity events. He was executed by lethal injection on May 10, 1994. Gacy's reaction to his death sentence was one of defiance. He told the judge that he would see you all in hell and that he would rot in hell. He also made a number of other statements that were considered to be disrespectful to the court. Number 2. Richard Ramirez. Richard Ramirez was a serial killer who terrorized California in the 1980s. He was known as the Night Stalker because he would often break into homes at night and kill his victims while they were sleeping. He often mutilated his victims' bodies and left satanic symbols at the crime scenes. He also wore black makeup. He was known to taunt his victims and their families after he killed them. He was a heavy drug user and had a long history of mental illness. Ramirez was caught eventually and put on trial. He was guilty of 13 murders, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. He was sentenced to death and died in prison in 2013. Ramirez's reaction to the death sentence was defiant. He said that he was not afraid of death and that he would welcome it. Number 1. Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy was a serial killer who confessed to killing 30 women in 7 states between 1974 and 1978. He was also suspected of killing many more. Bundy was a handsome and charismatic young man, which made him even more terrifying to his victims. He would often lure them into his car by pretending to be injured or disabled. Once he had them in his car, he would overpower them, rape them, and strangle them to death. Bundy would then often return to the bodies of his victims and perform necrophilia. Bundy was eventually caught and put on trial. He was found guilty of murder in 4 states and sentenced to death in Florida. Bundy appealed his conviction and sentence, but they were both upheld. He was executed by electric chair on January 24, 1989. Bundy's reaction to the death sentence was mixed. He initially expressed regret for his crimes, but he later denied responsibility for many of them. He also expressed anger at the death sentence, saying that it was cruel and unusual punishment. It's hard to imagine what it must be like to know that you're going to die for your crimes, but these killers seem to take it in stride. What are your thoughts on it? Let us know in the comments.